Ask the Podcast Coach for June 17th, 2023.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means it's Saturday morning. It is time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Collison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Happy Father's Day. What I'm calling Father's and Sons Day weekend. Not all guys are dads, but they are sons. I think you have to do it that way. So happy Father's Day and Sons Day to you.
There we go. Yeah, and if you're a father, tell your kids how proud you are of them, and if your dad's still around, be sure to let him know, like, hey, you're a pretty cool dad. And if your dad was a schmuck, I don't know, go to Denny's and get a
listen, slam. That's tough, because at a Father's Day celebration, I was talking to my daughter-in-laws about this, and they don't have the best relationship with their dad.
Yeah. And
I was like, hey, tell me a great story about your dad, and they didn't have one. Yeah. So, like, know your audience. I think the same thing in podcasting as well, know your audience. And I think in the United States, for the first time, or second year in a row, we celebrate Juneteenth. That also comes up here this weekend, so happy Juneteenth.
There we go. And, if you do go to Denny's, one of the things that you can get to wash down that grand slam of, is...
and it's really good there, but better at Waffle House. Let's just
there you go. And that's, of course, a popping hot cup of Java there. And that coffee pour is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. And if you're watching the video, you'll see there's the stuff that Mark has done for me. He did Ask the Podcast Coach. He did the School of Podcasting. He did the Podcast Rodeo Show. So obviously, if I didn't think Mark did a good job, I wouldn't have had him do a second and third logo for me. And it's not just my stuff. I mean, he's done a ton of different podcasters. And the beauty of it is he is a podcaster. Sure, he's a graphic artist and he's won awards for his artwork, but he's also a podcaster, and he understands that. And he's going to sit down with you and listen to your show and look at your website, because it's not just artwork. If you need a whole website, Mark can really just make you look amazing. So there he is, the one and only Mark. You've seen him. He's been mentioned at Podcast Movement, Podfest, of course, the School of Podcasting, Ask the Podcast Coach, and Build a Big Podcast. My buddy David Hooper has had him on. So check him out, podcastbranding.co. Nice slide, Dave.
Oh, yeah, that doesn't look very good, does it?
No, that's the old Dave did an oopsie there. Podcastbranding.co. We've got this, and apparently that did not translate well when I uploaded it. So yeah,
how did that get there?
That's a PowerPoint slide
for those that are on video. I'm sorry, audio friends.
Yeah. So I blew up podcastbranding.co to be huge, and it somehow added a text wrap, and it just shows podcastbranding.co. So .co.
That's one of those kinds of things. Test your graphics before you go. Big thanks to Dan Lefebvre over there, based on a true story podcast.com. And if you're looking for something to listen to, well, this week he's covering The Thin Red Line. So if you want to know, hey, how that's a historical movie, how accurately close is that? He checks it out this week, 256, based on a true story podcast.com. And Dan, thanks for your sponsorship. Dave, I know we got topics, but let me ask you this question before we get started, since I just said this.
Okay.
In your podcast, do you think, I mentioned Father's Day, Juneteenth. Those are holidays that are happening here in the United States right now. Two problems with that I can see. One is those are both, Father's Day might be more international, but we really, I mean, that's been a long time tradition here in the United States. Juneteenth, a new holiday, not a new event, but a new holiday to the United States officially. Do you mention those in your podcast? Does that date you? Like, does that date the podcast? In other words, do you worry about that? Are those things, thinking from an international standpoint, is that important if somebody's, in Europe or Australia or whatever, India, and they're like, it just doesn't really matter? I don't know. Do you think you mention those specific things? Does it localize you? In chat room, I'll take your advice on that. I'm a big fan of that, but should I be?
Yeah, I think it does kind of like, oh, look, it's an American talking about an American thing. And I get that. Like, like if it was Mark and he's doing a podcast, he's going to be talking about Boxing Day because it's a Canadian thing or whatever else. And I'm sure there's all sorts of
maple syrup and stuff.
Yeah, but I'm sure there's all sorts of, Craig's in Spain. So I'm sure there's some sort of Spanish, Ela Casa Madagascar Day, something, that I have no idea, but it's when so-and-so did the thing and the country was blah, blah, blah. There's all sorts of important things that people remember. So I don't feel left out if somebody brings it up. To me, it's kind of like, oh, that's right. Craig's in Spain or, whoever. So I don't know. What do you think?
What Craig chimes in and says over here in Europe, most people aren't even aware of U.S. holidays and culture. Yeah. And but yeah, well, I mean, and our numbers reflect, just in transparency, our numbers probably reflect a very heavy U.S. audience. I don't look at those very often, but would that be a correct assumption that we have more listeners in the U.S. probably than anywhere else?
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah. So do you forego that cultural tidbit for, let's say, 75% of your audience, or do you keep it generic for the rest of them? I don't know. That's why I asked you, is kind of even the audience as well, those listening live. I think that's one of those real gray areas in podcasting, is how localized do you get? Do you mention the farmers market that's going on?
Right.
Hey, it's Saturday morning. There's a farmers market going on in downtown Bellevue, Nebraska, which there is, right? I don't know.
I guess it all depends on how much time you spend on it and why you brought it up. Yeah. But if you were like saying you really should go to the farmers market, Craig's going to be like, yeah, I'm out. I'm done. I'm not. It's
Yeah. Well, that's a little bit of my shtick, right? I'd say happy Saturday or greetings, happy Saturday morning to you, and happy whatever. I try to always bring something in.
Well, today easy. It's let eat some ham day in Spain, according to Craig. So.
Not safe in all cultures, but it's that day. Yeah, I always just kind of wonder how specific or how localized we get. Is it okay? It's part of the charm in some cases, right?
Yeah. But in case you're wondering, anybody outside the U.S., this will be fun. From what I understand, Juneteenth there were a bunch. This is back when there was slavery in the U.S., so whatever that was, and there was a group of slaves that had been freed, but nobody sent them, there was no internet. Yeah, nobody sent them a note. They're still slaving away. And so Juneteenth was the day somebody finally went to them and, excuse me, you're free. You can quit doing that. Mm-hmm. And so that was the official, that they were the last people at that point, that was everybody was free. So, so Juneteenth is the celebration of that, I guess, yay. So
that we recognize that moment.
Let's start off. Yeah, here's a fun one. This is from Johnny Human. So there you go. Thank you, John. This is from Reddit, and there was almost like a theme at Reddit this week. He said, a small experiment with YouTube and podcasting channels. I thought others might find this interesting. 11 days ago, I started a new podcast. I host on Spotify and signed up for Podcast Connect and YouTube at the same time. All were approved on the same day, and all the same content has been posted. The one difference is on YouTube, I have used Shorts, but I was surprised by the data. The YouTube videos were 62 views. YouTube Shorts, 318 views. YouTube subscribers, 2. So that's always kind of fun. And the fun thing is, YouTube subscribers does not equal views, because I forget, I have thousands of people that are on my YouTube channel, and it's, when I post something, I don't get thousands of views. But meanwhile, so 62 views, 2 subscribers, 318 shorts on Shorts. Spotify, 142 listens, Spotify audience 72, Spotify followers 8. So again, here he's getting, 150, he's got 8 people. I'm not going to do math live. He says, no data is showing on Podcast Connect yet, because I think you need a month or so for that to get going. But given the effort of making thumbnails, recording video, and the sheer size of the of the use base, I would have thought YouTube would have wiped the floor with Spotify's numbers, but not so. I know the YouTube algorithm takes some time, but still, if of interest, I'll continue for the next 19 days and report back again. Happy to share this. What I would love to know is he's using Spotify for, his podcast. I wonder if he put it on, no, he said Apple Connect. So if you're on Apple, then you're on Overcast and all those other ones that pull from the back end. But there are other places, like is he on Google? Is he on iHeart and Amazon and Ghana and all those other places that aren't going to bring a tsunami of listeners, but it is going to bring something. And that's always been my thing about Spotify. And it's not a slack. It's just they don't make it easy to submit to other places. You have to do that on your own, which isn't even hard. It's copy and paste. So that's I heard that. But then somebody else chimed in. Again, it was like a theme. YouTube versus audio only. He says, we added YouTube and a video version of our podcast. It's doing great. People love it, and we're going at a faster rate with the video option than we did with audio only. Only problem is the video audience grows. Well, the only problem is as the video audience grows, our audio only audience shrinks. I don't think we've lost many listeners. I think that for the most part, they switched to watching our show over listening to it. The issue is that it's causing our overall podcast stats to dwindle and look as though this show is struggling because podcast stats don't include YouTube numbers. And so this was when I saw it. He's like, hey, I had audio only. I started video, and it looks like some people are now watching us on video. And I used my favorite analogy of your high school gym. Jim, do you remember what your high school gym looks like?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you got it. Yeah. You got the doors on each side. I said, It used to be you just let people in the front door, and then somebody went over and opened the side door. And anybody who was closer to the side door is now coming in the side door, but you still probably have the same number of people in the gym. It's just they're coming in a different way, which I found interesting because for me, if somebody says, hey, I don't know, Jim Carrey started a podcast. It's on YouTube, and it's also available on audio. I'm going right to my audio app to listen to it. I'm an audio guy. Other people are going to go right to YouTube. And really with Jim Carrey, that might be a better move because he's such a visual guy. But, some people are going to watch, some people are going to want to listen. I don't know. What do you know? Is your Gallup stuff on YouTube as well?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do them both.
It
attracts different audiences.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. It just attracts different audiences. I don't know if you can do a true A/B comparison between YouTube and a host provider, right? I still think there's enough like environmental factors that go into the promotion of both. One was Spotify and one was YouTube. Is that right? So
right.
Those are two large platforms that are big on self-promotion. So like it's good from that angle. I just don't know if you can compare. I think it is a little apples to oranges in the comparison of, for some folks, it kind of depends on your YouTube channel, your YouTube presence, your content. I mean, there's some indication that that YouTube is going through reading transcripts to also promote. They're learning kind of some of the content. But Dave, there's videos on YouTube that don't make any sense why they have 500,000 or 1 million views. We were talking about this a little bit in the pre-show. I mean, I watch these guys who cut wood. Chainsaw sound for the whole. I have to turn down the audio so my family doesn't think I'm insane for listening to chainsaw sound for 45 minutes, right? But I'm fascinated about what they do, and it's satisfying for me. That works for me. I think, and some people would say, and that is good content. Apparently, we have no way of predicting what people are going to like and what they're not going to like.
But
right?
While you're watching that, isn't a part of you wondering, okay, is this tree going to fall the way it wants to?
No, I'm not looking for disaster.
No, you're not looking.
No, I'm looking for. I like the symmetry. They stack it, or they pile it, or they clean things up.
Yeah,
I find great satisfaction when somebody takes, because I like to do this, when somebody takes chaos and makes it order. I love that, right? I just love organization. Like, I love a good set of show notes that look beautiful. Like, think about our podcast. It's chaos. It's on the fly. We're doing all these crazy things. There's no scripts to it. And yet every week you somehow take this chaos and make it beautiful in the show notes. And you do a nice job of that. I look at those, you post them when the Patreon feed comes out, and I see those on my podcast. I go take a look at them sometimes. And so I love that. There's great satisfaction in it. So for me, it scratches this itch of completion, of order. That's what I really like. But you wouldn't think like a million people would like that, but they do.
Well,
right?
DR says her little brother sets up a camera as he does live. Says he fishes on a Florida lake. He has over 500,000 followers.
It's crazy. Yeah. Well, okay, but it's now reality TV, and like it's true reality. And let's hope it's not. Some of these things aren't as fake as the old reality TV used to be.
Wait, right? What? Carrot Top? How did you get here? Yeah. Randy says maybe you're just easily entertained.
It's very true.
And Coach Dave says, weren't you into watching somebody building a boat or something like that?
2 of those. In fact, one of them's launching this week, and the other one will be launching in, 6 months or something like that. So yes.
Well,
yes.
And
all true.
That's one of the things Todd brings up. A good point, that people crave realism and authenticity. Yeah, it really is. Because I remember when we thought reality TV was reality, and there was really only one reality TV show, in my opinion, and that was The Real World, the very first one on MTV, because they had no idea what they were getting into, and they were actually, I think, being real, because they made their own little drama there. I don't think it was like the producer was like, hey, can you go pick a fight with her? I think it just happened organically.
Just don't tell me that WWE is fake. Okay, don't tell me that, because that would just ruin my world.
So yeah, it's going to be interesting. To me, from what I've seen, where he was saying how people were he's losing audio to video and vice versa. I don't. I basically look at it as growing 2 audiences. One people want to watch, one people want to listen. Dave brings up Will It Sink?
That's Letterman's.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was Letterman, where he would have a big tub of water and he would bring something out. That was called Will It Float?
Well, I also remember Will It Blend? Where people are sticking phones and stuff into this like major blender.
Industrial blender. Yeah.
Yeah. So
and there's people who like, on YouTube, there's people who like destruction. There's people who like seeing other people hurt themselves. In a good way, like a crotch shot off a skateboard when you're going, those kinds of. I don't know if that's good or not. I'm going to retract that whole statement.
I saw where the trailer now for Mission Impossible is online. I haven't seen it yet, but it's Tom Cruise. And the fun part about Tom Cruise is he's kind of turned into Jackie Chan. Like, I remember when Tom Cruise was known for being a great actor, and now he's known for being crazy and hanging on the side of a plane or whatever the heck he's doing, and I'm sure he's doing more stunts. But the fun part of a Tom Cruise movie is, for most of that, it's actually Tom Cruise. That's, there's this scene where he's hanging off of something that's forever tall, and I was just like, oh, there he goes again, Tom Cruise being Tom Cruise. So
David's comment about Will It Sink? He was asking, he was asking me, will those boats that I've been watching,
there you go,
will they sink? I don't know. The one is launching. They're doing a live stream. This is kind of an interesting thing. 5 years ago, these guys put a YouTube channel together, and they have literally built this boat from the keel up. They poured their own lead keel. Everything they grew. These were all local trees. It's a great story, right? And it concludes, that's not really true. This weekend is their launch party. And so they're streaming live on YouTube all day today. And they've gathered hundreds of thousands of watchers. They'll probably do 1 million to that live stream today. But the point of that is they have been faithful to post a video every single week for 5 years.
Wow.
And not only I think it's actually longer, but not only do they have great, this isn't just 2 guys sitting down on a Saturday morning recording whatever comes to the top of their minds, and then we edit it and put it out. This is planning, preparation, a lot of work, video. They have multiple people involved. They're paying shipwrights to help them. I mean, this has become a big production. And so those are really, really hard to do. I mean, it's just difficult, but they're doing it. And kudos to them for putting the hard work in. A lot of people get cynical. They're like, oh yeah, look at all that YouTube money. Well, it's expensive to do those kinds of, they're paying these people they're paying these shipwrights, which they should, to do this work. So, yes, they're making a lot of money off YouTube. Yes, they also have a lot of bills.
I did want to bring up, you ready for people to lose their mind, Jim?
Oh boy.
People are going to lose their mind. What's wrong? There's something, and that is, I'm going to bring up here. Let me put me on the screen for half a second. I'm going to show you my phone. This is my iPhone. There's no episode numbers in Apple Podcasts. They just, I don't know, can I zoom in? But if your show is episodic, they would be here if they were. But if I go to a show that is serial, like the History of Six Shooter, it will show, like in my case, S4E2, Cheese Festival Blues. So if you want to hear what it's like to be in a country band in the 90s, go check out historyofsixshooter.com. But people are going to lose their mind because, well, the other thing they're going to do is they're going to start putting their episode numbers in their title. So if you didn't do that before, because, you had your episode number in where it's supposed to go, the episode number. But to me, I'm kind of like, this again proves that episode numbers aren't that important. And so people, I'm sure, are going to start to do that. And I was just like, all right.
I think they're more important to us than they are our listeners.
Yeah, it's an ego thing. Absolutely.
Well, partially. For me, it's an organizational thing. I want to know if somebody says, hey, this episode number, there's this thing wrong with it. Like, it's easier for me to find it than if they give me the title. Now, I can find it. I have a pretty good search mechanism on my site, which would allow me to go in there and find that, to find that episode. But it's also, when you're thinking about all your audio files, it's also easier to see them or see those episode numbers in the text. I put mine at the very end.
Yep.
So they're down at the very end. But and again, I like that organization. Like, I feel good when I look at a list of my episodes and they're all in order. Mm-hmm. I really like that. So that I've been including them at the end of my titles from day one. Even if the great Dave Jackson said it shouldn't be in the title at all, I'd still do it because I want to do it.
That's it.
I'm going to rebel, Dave. Well, you're going to throw me off the show now?
That's it. I'm sorry, lady.
I just made up.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Well, that's the end of Jim. See you later.
I just made up a conflict, asked you if you were mad about it, and then got thrown off the show.
No, it's I always tell people, if you must put them at the end, but there are the thing that I'm not making this up. Somebody put the name of their show. So Ask the Podcast Coach, season 1, episode 441. That was the title, and then they started to put the actual title, and I'm like, you do know, wherever you can see the title, the name of the show is usually about an inch higher, and I'm with you. Episode numbers are definitely an ego thing, said the guy who has episode 441 right on the screen as we record this. So.
Yeah, but this is YouTube. I think it's a little bit different. I think that's a little bit, what I like is to get the most unique content as far forward in the title as possible. So, because that's what's going to show up. If you're trying to differentiate your episodes to your listeners, you want to get the most unique, like, you don't want your show title. You don't want episode numbers. Or your show, show title. No, your podcast title in there. Because that's not unique. That would be the same every time. You want, my personal, get it as unique as you can, as far forward as you can. Yeah. And DR says, her episode numbers are in her title as well. It's very satisfying. Well, then, super satisfying. By all means, do that. Super satisfying.
I had 2 tickets on Friday.
To Paradise?
I did.
You went to Paradise?
Yeah.
You got to Paradise?
Come with me. We'll leave tonight. Boy, talk about songs I don't need to hear anymore. But here's the key thing about that song, and here's how Dave's going to tie this into podcasting. We think podcasting is hard, and we have to do all this stuff. 2 Tickets to Paradise. For about 80% of that song is 2 chords. It's B minor, and then or A minor, then it goes up to B, and then on the chord you throw in a D. It's mind-numbingly dumb to play that song.
Should we get the guitar out and demonstrate that on the show?
So
a kazoo maybe.
Yeah, there you go. And I want to give a shout out to Tristan, who said, "Hey, the website for Six Shooter A is pointing at a dead link. If you go to historyofsixshooter.com, it's pointing at sixshooter.pinecast.co, which doesn't exist. I moved it to Red Circle because
what is this? Fix Dave's Links Day?
It is
like
yeah."
Everybody seems to be finding all your mistakes today.
Well, you need that. If you ever see Dave do this is Dave touching the Roadcaster to put a chapter marker. So you said, how does he organize all this stuff?
I know.
Behind the scenes, I'm dropping chapters so I can kind of know when we switch topics.
It's great to see you do that, by the way. I see you do that. I'm like, okay, we're moving on. Don't bring up the old topic. We're moving on.
But you need somebody to tell you the truth. I know I harp on this all the time, but I put out an episode of Building a Better Dave, and I was talking about Dave Ramsey talks about you have to attack your debt like you need the intensity of a cheetah, of a gazelle trying to outrun a cheetah. And so I'm doing this at like 12:30 at night. I'm doing this podcast and it's Building a Better Dave. Who cares? And I put it out there and I get almost an immediate phone call from my buddy Marcus Couch. And he's like, Dave, I don't know how you do it. And I go, what? He goes, not only did you misspell cheetah on the website, you misspelled it in the artwork. He's like, so at least you're consistent. He goes, there's no I in cheetah. It's EETA, whatever it is. And so I immediately went and changed it in that whole 9 yards. So you need somebody who's willing to tell you, hey, you messed up. And he knew it wasn't going to crush me. He knows that, I don't want to look like an idiot. And right now I'm looking like an idiot. And then the other thing I did was, and this is a great strategy because it worked. I am going to be on a podcast about how to sell a course, right? Because I've been running the School of Podcasting forever. And the guy that runs that runs a marketing what would you company, for lack of a better phrase. And he's talking about his intro and I can help you this and that, and I can help you build a funnel. And I'm thinking, I see what he's doing here. He brought me on because he's going to pitch a funnel to me. This is the whole bring who should be your customer on as a guest. And that's not at all what he was doing. But I told him at the end, I said, are you doing the thing where you're bringing me on because you want to pitch me a funnel? And he's like, no, not at all. I'm sorry if that's what I'm like, no. I go, because I would do that. I need somebody to look at my stuff. So he went over and looked at the sales page at the School of Podcasting. Wow. It's just the epitome of you can't critique your own stuff. I had a button that did nothing. It was like learn more, and it just went nowhere. And there were a couple of things. And it was fun watching the woman that did it. She sent me a 37-minute video going over top to bottom. This is good. This is good. This is weird. And then because I have one sales page on the actual thing that I use to run the courses, and then I have one on the School of Podcasting, and it's so obvious that the one on the actual School of Podcasting is the one I didn't pay as much attention to, and it was fun watching her politely kind of say, this is a train wreck. She didn't say that, but it was like, this is weird, and so I just say that to say I drank my own Kool-Aid and had somebody from the outside look at something, and I was like, so do that. Get somebody that will tell you the truth, because people Building a Better Dave is such a not a real podcast. It's just something mean. And in that episode, I think I said, this is where I ramble into the microphone for 10 minutes and press stop. I was like making a joke, but that's kind of what it is. So, so get somebody to look at your stuff, whether it's me or
wait a day. Sometimes
dude,
giving it 24 hours, come back to it. It doesn't have to publish today. I know you wrote this today. It's just like a podcast. I know you recorded this today. It doesn't have to go out today. It could go out tomorrow after you've listened to it, after a night's sleep. There's something about a night's sleep in our brain that does something different. You just see errors better. I know this. Listen, our English teachers told us this, and when we were in high school, we're in school. Give it overnight, edit it the next day, let it sit and come back to it. You see a lot more errors in that. And then, like you said, if you can get somebody else to take a second look at it before you click publish. I've been LinkedIn Live has a great not LinkedIn Live. LinkedIn has a great feature. You can write these articles on LinkedIn and you can make newsletters out of them and some other things. So it's pretty cool. If you haven't checked that out on LinkedIn and you're you like writing a lot of content, I've been doing that more. And actually they added a new feature. I don't know when, but they added a feature where you can actually share the unpublished link with someone else. So that they can take a look at it. Yeah, super easy. Give them a link. Boom. It's not published yet, but they can see it. And I have one of my teammates. I write some things and I say, hey, would you take a look at this before I click publish on it? And she'll send me some things back. And hey, I changed it. Look at it again. Just a helpful. Sometimes it's helpful. I think some of us were afraid to have somebody look at it, and the pain is much less. The earlier you catch the error than when you've published it and someone says, hey dude, you missed it. You put an eye in cheetah.
Yeah.
So get it done early. Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote an article, and it's always interesting because I'll write an article for Libsyn's marketing team. And by the time it comes out, I don't want to say it doesn't look like I wrote it, but they do a lot of things, but they asked, I said something in there where I was like, you always want to do such and such and such. I don't forget what it was. And they came back and they said, hey, just for the record, what happens if you don't? And I was like, oh, what are the consequences of this? So those are things that it's the curse of knowledge sometimes when you write stuff, because you know it and your brain is filling it in. And so when somebody reads it fresh, they're like, I don't get this. I just did a critique of the School of Podcasting. One of the students, that's one of the things we do is people can say, I want feedback on this. And the person's brilliant and they really know their stuff. And they just talked a lot of theory. And I said, can you kind of give me an example with this stuff? I said, because it's not triggering the theater or the mind for me. And she's like, that is such great feedback. I didn't even think about it. It's just theory, and not how do I use this stuff? So it's always good to get an outside opinion. I'm lucky enough that I have people that like Marcus that'll let me know, or they'll either say, hey, that was like Todd the Gator. One time I did an episode and he's like, I talked about leaning into your humanness now that AI is doing so much stuff that ChatGPT doesn't have any previous experience, the time you were on a roller coaster with your dad and the thing that straps down didn't strap down and your dad had to keep grabbing you and pulling you back into the roller coaster. That's ChatGPT doesn't have that.
Yeah.
So
couple errors for you to fix this, since we're talking about them, right? Overcoming your feed. So that's fear, right? It's this fear. You had feed in some cases. And then in the artwork from 2 weeks ago, there's 2 C's in podcast in the graphic. I see that on the site.
Interesting. All right.
You kind of wonder though sometimes. I mean, it's awesome that people are paying attention to those, right? They're like, oh, sometimes you wonder. I mean, if you ever wonder if anybody's actually paying attention, make an error like that and see what kind of feedback you get. Because people do. You and I don't have this gift of seeing those things. We're process oriented. We're moving through getting things done. I'm terrible at this. I always got to get double check, triple check, whatever. And when I don't, there's always an error in it. But there's some folks who just really have that gift. And so listen, we'd be better served if we had some of those folks as partners and said, hey, could you look at this before I publish it? Although that's not really in our workflow.
Yeah. You said the thing. I would catch probably 80% of these if I, instead of publishing, like today's episode is going to go out about 4:00 today. If I waited and put it out on Monday, I'd probably catch that stuff. But normally I'm doing the Dave thing where I'm like 95% of the way done, and I'm already starting to think about what I'm going to buy at the grocery store. My brain's moving on, and it's those little things that you miss. But we all need a Zeke. Holy cow. Zeke said on February 2nd, it's June. So back in February, apparently there's no episode for that in the feed. I'll have to check my Libsyn feed. I know the one after London isn't there. And I thought about making that a patron only episode once I realized I hadn't put it out. like, hey, if you want it, you can be a patron for $5 a month. But he said the 21st and the 28th aren't there. That I need to look at because I know.
I think the 2-2 is a date, or I mean, is a number. This is the second comment of 2. But Zeke, we didn't see your first comment in the feed for whatever reason. It's not there. I think that's what that is.
Yeah, I'll have to.
But Zeke, like you should, find a way to get Zeke to look at these things before you hit publish.
My quality control person, yeah,
exactly, yeah. Well, I know you got busted. You said this before, and this happens to me all the time too. You got busted for misspellings from you had a listener who would critique everything.
I had a troll, and he would get. It was fun because he would. This was on the School of Podcasting. And I can't believe people are paying you money and you misspelled the word there. It's not THEIR, it's THERE or vice versa, whatever it was. How dare you? Blah. I can't believe it. And I'm like, look, dude, I'm teaching people how to podcast. I'm not teaching them how to be a copywriter. Like, you know what I mean? It was like, everything. And then at one point he got mad and said, I'm done with this show. I can't take it, blah, blah, blah. And then, literally, 4 months later, he left a comment on my YouTube, and I was like, "Oh, I've missed you so much." So it was, so it was helpful. I would always thank him, but at the end, he started getting really personal and calling me stupid and dumb, and I'm like, you know what? F you. What? I don't need that in my life. Thanks, but thanks. I appreciate constant, or what's the word? Criticism. It's constructive criticism. Always love that. But when you're calling me an idiot, I'm like, I've got enough of that in my head. I do that myself. So thanks.
And Zeke, again, I'm going to say something. I'm not trying to discourage you from it. But at this point, these errors probably more helpful to send to Dave directly than to put in the chat room. Like, think about it. We're in the middle of a podcast. Yeah. I would appreciate that. But this is also, I think, sometimes listener awareness of hey, I get this all the time when I'm on a live stream, and folks are trying to bring up very specific problems that are, whatever. And you're like, I'm doing a show right now, and I'm kind of focused on the content. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to give you as much, or I'm not going to remember it as much. It's super helpful if you just send that to me in an email at this point, and I'll handle those. So that's another one of those listener awareness things sometimes too. It's like, can you give if you're a listener, can you give two specific feedback? I think sometimes the chat room isn't necessarily a place to handle some of those things.
Yes, thank you. Because seriously, I would have to watch the video again to see the chat. So once the show's over, I'm not going back. But if you want to, schoolofpodcasting@gmail.com. And, I'll take Dave's mistakes for 300, Alex. Dave not only has trouble spelling, but also typing. That's typically it. It's not that it's now the cheetah thing. I don't know where I think that was just sleep deprivation. But for my first podcast show, he misspelled entrepreneur with entrepreneur, whatever this is. This killed my search capabilities. It's pre.
It's a hard word to spell, just to be honest.
It's also a hard word to say.
I have to look it up I've got to look it up every time.
He said, but I did forgive him in 2007 when I realized I could not change no, you can change the title.
Did it require forgiveness? Was it an offense of that kind of, I mean, and again, right. I mean, those, when we think about listener feedback, we're getting this live here. The listeners have an obligation as well in the way in what you say. Sometimes your listeners they'll say something and they never intended it to sound mean, but because text has implied negativity to it, at least it does in English for us. You read it wrong, and then it creates tension, and you're like, did you really mean to say it? Did you want to be a jerk? So I think even as you're taking feedback in a chat room like this, I think you got to be really, really careful not to read too much into it when when you get it for the first time.
Oh, absolutely. In the same way that you made a great point of maybe when we're publishing, we should give it a day. When you get any kind of feedback, you want to again, take it, especially if it's negative feedback. If you're like, how dare you? No, now's not the time to like, let's sit back. Let's chew on it a bit. Do they have a point? Because sometimes it's not, their point is valid. It's just how they said it is what's getting you,
Well, not everybody's good at giving constructive feedback in a way that, I mean, it takes as much, I think it takes as much work to give it as it does to take it.
Oh.
And I think sometimes we think, no, I'm just going to word vomit on a page to this person and they will thank me. And you're like, well, no, when you're giving feedback, you should probably do the same thing that you think about it, let it sit for a day. Is this really what I want to say to them? Right. I mean, I think that takes as much when we're giving feedback to people to think about how they're going to receive it as well. Listen, the word on all of this is grace. We just need to have a lot of grace for people when we're doing these kinds of things and just say, hey, look, okay, it happened. Send it to them. Don't leave a comment on the site. Send it to them in an email, like some of those kinds of things to just send. Listen, we should always, what do they say? Encourage in public and correct in private.
That's it.
Those are, I mean, if you can get that, you can get that part down. You should not be correcting people in public. Send them a private note. Right?
I saw that at a Jimmy John's a couple weeks ago, and I was like, oh, that's such bad management. But Zeke also says the podcast review show, the entire podcast is missing. That's
from Spotify. I think was the other part.
And he's correct. You know why? Because I changed the feed and Spotify, because they're Spotify. You have to manually update it, and I never did because that's another show that's a real show. We only do it when we get paid because we spend about 3 hours going over your podcast. So,
go ahead. Sorry. Coach Dave says we have the same problem with coaches on the field, right? Parents always want to talk when practice or the game is in session and your attention is divided. I mean, listen, when you're giving feedback, have a little bit of social awareness of what's going on around you. What's happening here? Can this be saved? Does it really need to be said? I think sometimes we think when we're giving feedback, we can just spew whatever we want. Hey, you asked for feedback, I'm giving it to you.
Yeah.
Well, that's not really what that means. I mean, we need an equal amount of social awareness of like, hey, what's going on here? What are we trying to do? Is the situation right for this? I think sometimes we feel like, and I just did this to you as I interrupted you, but I felt like, no, I got to say it now before I forget it, right? Well, if you forget it, it probably wasn't that important. So, have some social awareness around that as well. And I'm pointing to myself to that at the same time.
Chef Robert says, Dave, the episode tab on your website, is that a pod page thing? Yes, it is. Everything on the website is a pod page thing. Or is that something else? Thanks for your help. Yeah. It's what I love about that is you can add categories. Now I don't believe on Ask the Podcast Coach, but if you go to podcastconsultant.com, it's another website of mine that I've put categories. So if you just want to see things about strategy or growth or, planning or this and that, you can put categories. That's in Pod Page. You put the categories in there and then they show up on Pod Page. Those won't show up in like Apple or something like that. But again, I always talk about Pod Page, and it's because, I think it's awesome. It's really, really cool. So, in fact, speaking of that, and awesome things, this would be an awesome time to thank our awesome supporters. First things first, of course, speaking of the School of Podcasting, if you want to go see a crappy sales page, go over to schoolofpodcasting.com. You will see somewhere on that page in between the mixed alignments and the buttons that go nowhere, you'll see that you can get courses, you can get coaching, and a really awesome community. So if you want it, check it out. It will be updated very soon. I'm really happy Monday is a holiday because I will be fixing the sales page of the School of Podcasting. And yes, we have a actually she's not really new, but I found her website, and that is our new awesome supporter is Connie Manell. It's resting in the Word. It's guided meditation. In fact, her description in Apple Podcasts says, don't let stress and worry keep you from having a peaceful night's sleep. Resting in the Word is created to help heal your spirit, and quiet your mind. This guided meditation includes some of the most beloved verses from Scripture. Each topic includes a short devotion by teacher, writer, and host Connie Manell. So Connie, thank you so much for being an awesome supporter. You can find her at restingintheword.com. But I saw that come in, and she's actually been a supporter for a couple months, and I was like, hey, what's your website so we can promote it? And I found it. So thanks for that. But speaking of Podpage, yes, all the cool stuff that the chef was talking about, you can see at trypodpage.com. That is my affiliate, by the way. That's my affiliate link. Now, if you want to learn Podpage, because you're like, what's this Podpage thing Dave is talking about? Go to learnpodpage.com. And speaking of learning stuff, if you want to learn more about home gadget geeks, go over to theaverageguy.tv. That's, of course, Jim's website. And I've changed this to be more realistic. We're on the journey to 35.
Oh, I like it. Lowering our standards.
That's right. And then once we get 35, we'll have the journey to 36. But if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, it's super easy. Just go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. In addition to getting things like the video version of this and bonus content, you get invites to some meetups that aren't available to the public. All you have to do, again, is go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. So
next week will be the journey to 30. That actually sounds pretty good, right?
Yeah.
But how many do we have?
We actually have 34.
Oh, okay. So
I'm going for one.
It just takes one more like.
Yeah.
By the way, like and subscribe, and then I'll say it again. Tweet that we're live, and I'll retweet it and like it if that's your thing.
Yeah. And then once we get 35, it'll be the journey to 36 or maybe 40. But,
Yeah, 5's a good goal.
Yeah.
I think 5 at a time is a good goal.
So we have here from Starzology. In the podcast description, is it okay to add many links to websites and affiliates? Or is it better to keep the RSS feed smaller and have all links on a blog? This is a great question. And first, I want to clarify. There is the show description, and I don't recommend putting any links in there because they just found you. Like, I just found your show and you're sending me away. Why would I go to your website? I haven't even listened to you yet. So, but in the episode description, that's one of the things I tell people, because a link to a website isn't going to really completely go crazy. Like, it's not going to make your feed super long. You could just say, in my show notes, it's usually mentioned in this show, and then it's just, profit from your podcast and home gadget geeks and blah, blah, blah. And it's just links, because what will upset your listeners, at least my listeners, is if I mention a great book and I'm like, oh, if you want to learn about telling stories, you've got to listen to Storyworthy. It's a great book by Matthew Dix. If I don't have a link to this in the episode description, somebody's going to send me an email and go, what the heck? Because I know I get irate. I talk about waiting a day to respond. I just want to send the person and go, you made me so hot and bothered about this website or product or whatever. I went to your website and it's not there. So yeah, I would absolutely put the links, but not in the show description. I always love when people are like, join my Patreon here, because first things first, in Apple, those links to your show description are not going to be clickable. They might be clickable in your episode description, and that's based on who knows. I mean, some apps, the links are clickable. Sometimes you have to put the whole HTTP:/ to make it clickable. It's kind of goofy, but for me, an episode description is, here's a paragraph that explains what's in the show, and here's the links to everything we mentioned. I don't know, Jim, am I missing anything? Or
no, I like it. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with that section.
Yeah.
But I think at a minimum, get that description, get a well-written, first paragraph for sure. I mean, 99% of the time, they're not going to make it past the first paragraph unless they're looking for a link. So paragraph, link, I like that as a minimum. You can use and reuse that, by the way, that once you get that written out in a format, you can copy and paste that into YouTube and copy and paste that into whatever else that you need for that. Get that part done well and done right, and then use it and reuse it for sure.
Well, in Libsyn, we have these thing called snippets, and I have one snippet for Mark. I have a snippet for Dan. And then I have a snippet for the School of Podcasting. I have a snippet for Become an Awesome Supporter. So there's like 6 paragraphs of stuff. And by paragraphs, I mean like 3 sentences each. But nonetheless, when I go to make my show notes, it's just, all right, new episode. And as it's uploading, I'm like snippet 1, snippet 2, snippet 3, snippet 4, and we're done. And then I like, okay, what did we mention here? It's pretty simple to do. Now, if you're like, I don't use Libsyn, check out Text Expander, as Dave is adding yet more links to add to the show notes here. But it's pretty handy. And that's just a thing that you basically, when I type this, you type this. And I've seen people that have put an entire, almost like a template for an episode that you can put in there. So always handy to do. But the other thing we should do is...
And now, oh, he's been waiting for this. It's time for Jim to get his nerd on.
This week, I was doing some PC maintenance, and I realized my wife's computer, when I bought it a couple years ago, she doesn't use it that much, so it sits there. I make sure antivirus is up to date and all that other stuff. About once a month, not a bad idea to go back, even on your own computers. Maybe the first of the month is your maintenance day. You go back, you can do some stuff, make sure your antivirus is up to date, everything's looking good, your backup is in place, some of those kinds of things you can get to at that sort. And I realized it only had 8 gig of RAM. Now, 8 gig of RAM on a Windows computer used to be awesome. It's no longer awesome. It's okay. It's just okay. So I went to, she is a Lenovo, so I went to their website. You could do this for Dell or whatever. Go to their website, see what kind of, what the motherboard supports in there. So you can go in there and say, hey, the maximum amount of RAM this motherboard will support is fill in the blank. Most cases, it's 16 or 32. Rarely would you probably buy a computer them as much as 64 unless it's brand new. And RAM's cheap enough right now that you should just put the max that you can put in there, because Windows continues to take more and more and more resources to do its thing. So went on the website, got the part number that I needed for that, did a quick search on your retailer of choice. If you want to use Amazon or whatever, there's lots of ways to get that done. Ordered it for $12 because it's cheap right now.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be upgrading her to 16 gig, which will support her for the next couple years. So if you're a podcaster, you're using an older PC, you might have just 4 gig of RAM in there. And if it seems slow, that's why, or that's at least part of the problem. Make sure you're spending a little bit of time. These are things we talk about on Home Gadget Geeks all the time. Make sure you're spending a little bit of time figuring out, hey, can I max that out? And okay, it's not going to be cheap in all cases, but it was really inexpensive in mine. It's a good easy upgrade. And by the way, it's like putting Legos in your this upgrade is not hard. You open up the case, there's two or 4 slots. You push 2 buttons, the thing pops out, you put the new stuff in, make sure it clicks in. This is a PC upgrade that I think just about anybody can do. Just make sure you unplug the PC before you turn it off.
Yeah.
Unplug it right before you do it. But upgrading that RAM right now may be a good option to bring new life back to your PC if you're a Windows guy.
Picture your RAM as your desk. And so like right now, my desk is, once again, and I'm kind of going in my head going, why is it messy? But, if I wanted to, I'd have to move my speaker, and I got my blood monitor and my wallet and all. So I'd have to make room for stuff. And that slows my production down so if you have, not enough RAM in your computer and you open up Word and Excel and, iTunes, because you're on a PC, is that a memory hog? All of a sudden, your computer has to move stuff off your desk, and it's swapping out. So what happens then is when you get more RAM, you get a bigger desk, so you can do more things at the same time. It doesn't always speed things up, but in most cases it does, because if you've got, let's say, what did you say? You're up there to 8 gigs? So
8, yeah.
Yeah, so let's say you got 8 gigs of RAM, and you're like, great, but you're only... Your desk isn't really full yet. It's got 7 gigs of memory in it, and you go to 16 gigs. It's not going to speed things up because you weren't running out of room yet. But as Jim was mentioning, it almost always is, because every time a new release comes out, that software is going to take a little more memory to get up and running.
Every Windows PC instance I've seen lately is bumping up against that 8 gig pretty hard, and it really wants 10.
Yeah.
And so if you can get 16 or more, There's some variations in that. You can send me an email, jim@theaverageguy.tv, if you want to discuss your specific setup. I love talking about those kinds of things, but it's a pretty inexpensive. When I built my new computer, that motherboard supports 128 gig of RAM, and I just put it in. I'm like, I'm always looking for this thing anyways, and I do some virtualization stuff, and I built it for my my Oculus headset as well, and I thought, let's just go with that, right? It's easier. But from an upgrade standpoint, it may be worth it. Maybe that time, take a peek. You can go into your system settings and go to the About tab on Windows. So Settings and About. It'll tell you how much you have. And then look it up on the website, see what it supports. If it supports more, now may be a good time to upgrade it.
I might have to do is, as you say that, I'm like, my PC's definitely old in the tooth. I'm like, RAM might, it definitely would help it out. So that's, there you go.
Yeah, your local, like DR says, your local Geek Squad can help you with this as well. If you don't feel comfortable with it, you can take it in. A little more expensive, but you get the help that you need, and they can put that in there. And I did when I worked at a computer store way back in the day. I actually put the wrong memory in and forked the computer. In those days, you could. We could never get it back. The store ended up replacing the computer. My bad.
Well, I was surprised. I had the assistant at my church. She has an all-in-one computer monitor kind of thing. And when I heard she took it to the Geek Squad, I'm like, oh, they are just going to rake her over the coals. And actually, it wasn't bad. It wasn't cheap, but I was like, that's because she had a thing where her eyesight's horrible. So she had the thing where you can zoom in and make all the icons gigantic. And then to make a long story, she couldn't get it back to normal. And they had to go in and I forget exactly what the solution was. I think they logged in as somebody else so they could adjust the something. But bottom line was it was not cheap, but it wasn't quite as they could have really. It's like if I take something in to a mechanic, I know almost nothing about cars, and they could just go crazy. So
and before you do anything, back up,
and back up, yes,
back up, and then back up again before you do anything. So.
Yeah, Craig says I just bought a new desktop. It's been sitting here for 3 weeks. It takes so long to get it up and running with it does. Loading all your software. Oh man, that takes forever. If somebody, since we're talking hardware, if somebody is starting a podcast today, I always say, are you doing video? Because that's the one where I go, okay, you better get some serious RAM in there. What would you recommend today for the new podcaster?
Oh, for a new, I think most computers you can buy are going to be just fine, except for the super low end ones, right? They're not going to, from a video perspective, they're going to struggle a little bit. But I think anything in that $750 to $1,250 range, right? It's going to get you pretty good. You don't, in a lot of cases, you don't need a dedicated GPU. That's the graphical processor unit, right? That's the gaming thing. You don't need those. They're nice to have, and they come with some of the computers that you have. But price point is king. I wouldn't go top when I was hanging out with my guys at thinkcomputers.org as they were helping me build my rig. I kept trying to go a little bit to the top because I was like, oh, I could put this in. And they're like, you're not really going to use that, to be honest.
Yeah.
That for most podcasters, that medium range is going to be just fine. I would try, just to be honest, if I was buying a new computer today, I wouldn't do any less than 32 gig of RAM, and I wouldn't do any less than a 2 gig hard drive. If that's going to, 2 terabyte hard drive, if that's going to be what you're getting in that, right? Because things just take a lot of space. And so, those would just be my minimum requirements. On the Intel versus AMD side, I think either one is fine. Intel has a i3, i5, and i7. AMD is a Ryzen 3, 5, and 7. Weird how that worked out with the same numbers.
Right.
The 5 for most podcasters would be just fine. If you think you're going to do video and you want a little bit more power and that you want that thing to last a little bit longer, the 7 version might be good. Now Intel's changing that coming up, so those numbers are going to get changed. But that would be some of my advice. DR says I just checked. Mine says 16 gig. 15.3 usable. Is that good? Okay. So yes, that's great. 16 gig is great, DR. The question is now go to your task manager. So go down to the bottom of the screen, right click and choose task manager if you're on Windows 10. and see what it's running at. And you'll get some, if you click on the performance tab, you'll get some cool graphs of line graphs of what's being used, right? And what's Mac has a version of this too, iStatistica or something like that, where you can kind of see what's being used in real time. If you're all the way to the top on things, well, you've got some, okay, you don't have enough, you're running too many things, or you've got too much stuff going on or whatever. The key would be, I also think, on a Windows box, reboot that thing first. Like it amazes me how people go weeks without rebooting their Windows computer. And people say, well, you shouldn't have to. You never have to reboot a Mac. That's true. I mean, you do, but you don't. But it's not a Mac. You bought a Windows. You bought a PC. So reboot that thing. I say reboot it nightly if you can.
Yeah.
If you can, and I don't, just to be honest, at least once a week if you're using it as a production box.
Yeah, I'm amazed. I will go in and see where I have like 3 instances of Evernote. And I'm like, what? And I'll close that down. Dropbox is another one that I'll see, like I have 4, or Loom. A bunch of these, and they just all chew up memory, and I'll like reboot. I'm like, oh, what do you know? Things are working great. Uncle Marv says, don't forget to make sure
hard to get a PC today that's still a spinner, right? That's still one of those spinning drives. If you're buying new, you're almost always going to go with a SSD or an M.2. Those are both solid state drives, which just means you don't have physical spinning. Right. Those are just slow drives, right?
Which also means you're not going to get any kind of warning shot that your hard drive's going bad.
No, very true. Yeah, you could hear it click. You're like, oh boy, it's time I better back up, right? I better back up. Yeah. Listen, SSD technology has gotten really, really, really good. And those failure rates are pretty low now. And so this isn't, it's not the new kid on the block anymore. I mean, they're making millions of SSD chips and for this memory, and their failure rates are it's not that they're failure proof. They're just better than they used to be. So just back it up. Make sure it's always backed up.
Yeah. This is getting a lot of love these days. Craig says, a friend of mine wanted a good quality USB mic for podcasting and got the Shure MV7. He's really happy with it. And the only thing I have against it is I don't have one sitting here. I pop that thing like nobody's business. The windscreen on that is kind of thin. Now, maybe I'm just full of hot air. A lot of people say that. Where is my rim shot? But you can buy, because I once Googled like MV7 windscreen, and I saw where a bunch of people are like, I'm popping this thing like nobody's business. And you can get a aftermarket. The new Rode Pod mic, which is on the way finally to me. I know the new Rode Duo is now available. I got that announcement from Rode. And it now comes with, even though it's got that big metal great pop screen on it, they now have a windscreen you could put over it. And I think part of that is just to make it look like an SM7B. It's like, let's make it look cooler. I don't know. I thought it was pretty cool in itself, but I normally have those microphones right behind me, but anyway. I saw somebody in Facebook. They said, hey, I've got a Samsung Q2U, and I'm looking to upgrade. And I was kind of like, I wanted to go because they said it was too bright. And I'm like, you do know you can turn down the treble and post for free? Like, you don't need a new mic for that. And somebody recommended the MV7. I like any mic. I don't know that I would recommend a mic these days that wasn't USB and XLR, because it just gives you that. I understand that sometimes the USB doesn't sound as good, but just to have that flexibility. I mean, because on one hand, you can't go wrong with the Shure SM58. That's the microphone that you run trucks over and things like that. It's a workhorse, but I'm like, now I got to buy a Focusrite to get it into the computer, and
which isn't bad though. I mean, it gives you some more options. Yeah. It's not. You're going to spend about $100 for that 58.
Yeah.
You're right. I actually don't know why podcasters don't use 58s more. I mean, it's the industry standard microphone. It sounds great. They make 1 million of them. You can find them anywhere.
Yeah.
They sound great plugged into any audio device. It's going to give you a pretty good mid-range. It is surprising that these things, they're not USB. It's surprising that those things though didn't compete better And maybe they did, but I don't know of any podcasters like, yeah, I have an SM58. And you're like, that's an awesome microphone. I mean, every performer in the world has used those at some point in time.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And I somewhere in the early days, I definitely used a 58, probably used a 57 because I had them, you know, as a musician. And I have seen many a drunk person knock over my mic stand and go, oh crap, there, you know, and you pick it back up and no, it's still working.
The head's crumpled though. The head's got a solid flat spot.
I've bought, and you can buy them, the new, like the, whatever that is that goes over the actual mic on a 58. You can buy a new windscreen / thing, and it looks brand new because it had been to, you know, it'd been through it.
Well, you can't put your thumb in there and push that thing out.
That's
like
true too.
You can, it never looks quite the same, but then it looks rugged. You know, it looks cool. It's like, man, this thing's been used. This is a solid mic. It's a good microphone. I used them for a lot of years in all the church work that I did.
Yeah. DR says, I need to figure out how to use my Scarlett. Again, if you're, you know, you plug it in, I think you have to install a driver. I think that's...
You do. You need the software for the Focusrites.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's pretty easy. I just changed to a Focusrite in the Gallup Studios. Just put one in, and it's pretty easy to set up for the first time. You can choose to or not really use the software if you want to. It'll work. You do have to have the software installed to get that thing working.
Yeah. Dave says, it's the mic cage. Thank you. I was trying to figure out what that little thing was that it talked about. The person was asking about increased discoverability or SEO tweaks. He goes, 3 years in, I've been podcasting weekly for 3 years. I want to increase my podcast discoverability through search. I'm a solopreneur, spelled correctly, and did five pins, meaning Pinterest, 3 reels, 3 YouTube shorts, 7 TikToks a week. So that is 10, that's 18 pieces of content a week. Hated it, and it did not increase my weekly downloads. Again, I like social when it works, it's a trickle, at least from what I've seen. Also tried the live streaming and using that as a podcast for 10 episodes. Juice isn't worth the squeeze for me being on video. Plus, entertaining that audience takes away from the content I prepare for the podcast. Cause friction with my ADHD. Currently, my podcast has its own website via Simplecast with its own domain name. Plus, I upload transcripts for all episodes. Areas I've identified that I can improve. So this is, I need to rewrite episode titles. We just talked about this. I went for clever, and I'm now willing to be boring to bring in more of my people. Yeah, those keywords come in handy. Make each episode a blog post on my own website. Again, I recommend that. I found a WordPress plugin that imports all episodes plus show notes via the RSS feed. Yep. There's one from Second Line Themes that makes it really easy. Finding key phrases to use in new episode titles. Any tips on how to do this without spending 3 days down the SEO hold? That's a tough one. Anytime you put your toe into the SEO pool, you come up and you're like, wait, it's 2023? I need to change my podcast name. Mine is irreverent and uses profanity. Yeah, that's going to get you out of a few, I don't know, the whole like F*** CK thing. I just want to go, have we not played that one out? Like, oh, we put the F word in like, let's go cuss behind the barn. Here's some other things. Selecting episodes to write out more robust guides, meatier blog posts with visuals and cross-linking. Yep. So these are kind of like, yep, that's a good one. Participate in podcast networks that are looking for podcast guests to go on their show. I seldom have guests on mine. Editing 2 people and conversations are tedious for me. And also we should offer to air their interview on my feed to cross-promote. The purpose, the podcast is the tipping point for people to hire me as a coach. Which is good. He knows his why. That's good to know. Once people discover me, they are obsessed. I want to be better at helping people find me. I have a library of 150 plus episodes now. No plans to stop. Podcasting is my favorite, and would love for my podcast to be the hub of my content, main driver for bringing in new business. I'd love insights from y'all and what you've tried and what has and hasn't worked. Any efforts on optimizing tips or tools you might know about. I'm a single solopreneur and single parent. Other areas I might be overlooking. So that's a big, long list of stuff that he's already doing. To me, when I heard all the TikToks and pins and stuff, I'm like, if you're getting burned out, that's the first thing I'm like, or use something like Switchy to put a trackable link on those things so you can tell, okay, I put, 3 pins up this week and got 1 click. Like maybe your audience isn't on Pinterest. The other thing, you noticed that the one thing he didn't mention that we were talking about earlier, he didn't say, and I had a good friend of mine listen to it and tell me what was good and bad. That was when I saw all this stuff, I'm like, nowhere in here is it. I formed a focus group and had them give me, because he's doing a lot of promotion and stuff. And I was like, do you know if it's good or good or not? I don't know.
Yeah. Audience feedback, right? Have they done a survey? I didn't hear a survey in there.
Yeah.
So have you done a survey of your audience? The other thing I didn't hear in there is this: if his audience is super engaged the moment they listen or whatever, right? The ones that stick. Are you asking them to share it? Are you leveraging them? Because it's a birds of a feather flock together type deal where, you know what, your social stuff, you may not be reaching, like you might have a niche, however you want to say that is super tight and super specific. So you may not be finding them on social, but chances are if your listeners are super engaged, they know who people who are just like them who may also be engaged. So what are you doing to do the old sales technique of give me 3 names of people I should contact about my product and services? Now, don't do it that way in podcasting, and maybe you do, but to say, what kind of campaigns are you doing to get you to share, to get your listener to share your show with others that are like them?
I just listened to a show that I actually am going to approach to say, hey, I think I'd be a good guest for your podcast. And because it's all about growing a small business. And her reason is she's a CPA. And at the end, she didn't do any call to action about hiring her as a CPA. It's in her description and stuff, but I was like, there's a reason people go like and subscribe and ring the bell. You've got to do that call to action. Even everybody knows where the subscribe button is. We still got to say like, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you don't ask, you're not going to remind people, or they may be brand new. Maybe they didn't find your podcast on a website. Maybe your description, or when you go to sell, like, hey, like if you like, maybe, I don't know, need like somebody to, I don't know, your books and stuff. If you're confused, thanks. Like, wait, what's the website again? And it's so, that's the other thing I thought of, like, A, check your content. B, ask your audience to share. Let's spur on that word of mouth. And I'd love to hear, I need to go back and see if I can find this post, because I'd like to say, show me your podcast. I want to go listen to it, because I guarantee you, as I said earlier, you missed the low-hanging fruit. And he's got a lot of fruit there, but I'm sure there's something there. And probably his call to action is at the very end. If you listen to the School of Podcasting, if you listen to this show, the call to action is in the middle of the show, because the phone's already in the pocket. They're listening, hopefully. And you go from there. But I just thought that was a great laundry list of things to do. Look for keywords. There are all sorts of keyword tools out there. Go to AppSumo. I'm sure there's 50 million of them that will help you with keywords. I like keywords, but in the end, like I've had AI tools that help with titles, and they always end up making things that are right on the border of clickbaity. And I'm like, that doesn't really sound like me, when it's like the magnificent way of 7 things that you can blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's not, So, and then DR says, they can also get the listener involved with questions through SpeakPipe. Yeah. If you're going to do a question, it has to be a specific question. Like right now, it's fun. My question of the month, if you go to schoolofpodcasting.com/question, it's so hard. There's a PDF to explain it. And it's from the book, Make Noise by Eric Newsom. And you have to explain your show in 10 words or less. And there's a big, long list of words that you can't use. And it's hard without saying exciting and new. Come aboard. I'm sorry, that just popped in my head.
We're expecting you.
Great branding. But it's a really interesting. Yeah, you can't use amazing, curious, incredible, spectacular, astounding, diverse, in-depth, and many, many other words. And the whole point of it is, it really makes you think about, what is my show about? How is it different in that whole 9 yards? Yeah. And it's interesting because I think I've had maybe 3, probably 2 responses, because it's not easy. But it's a specific question where I see people go, I'm not getting any feedback from my audience. And you listen, they're like, hey, tell me what you think about the show. Like, that's, They're like, what do you mean? Like the artwork or whatever? Whereas if you say, hey, this week we talked about having feedback on the things you're working on. Have you ever had feedback? What kind of feedback did you get? And what changes did you make based on feedback? That's a question that people can answer, because it's not like, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Well, my number 2 son, who's never done anything around podcasting, started a Twitch stream just last night. He's been talking about it for 6 months. Like, maybe I should do this. And all the, my oldest has been on my podcast. My number 4 is a VR kind of guy. I don't want to say he's famous, but he kind of is in the VR world, which is super cool to watch. Nobody knows who he is, but it's super cool. And then so John, my son, started this. And how's he going to get, he was on Twitch last night. So they pinged us on Facebook. Hey, John's on Twitch. Can you guys go out and watch it? So we went out and watched it. I left it on as long as I could so he could get those Twitch numbers. But he's going to he's painting Gundams by hand, these Gundam models, these Japanese models that are super cool, super intricate. And he was on for 3 hours and painted this one little part. 3 hours, little part, right? Wow. Talking about technique and how he's doing things in the paints. And he's going to be really good at this. For his first one, he was really good. Like it was one of those situations I'm like, ooh, this thing's got some legs. This could go somewhere. And that super niche, super specific in what he's doing. He's going to need to get listeners to share this. Like, this is how he's going to, there's no amount of advertising he can do, no amount of trickery that he's going to do with SEO. His listeners, he needs to have other Gundam fans say to other Gundam fans, hey, you ought to go subscribe to this Twitch channel because this guy's doing this really cool hand painting stuff. The conflict is between airbrushing and hand painting, and he's taken the hand painting side of things. So that's one of those perfect situations. People are like, how do you get more listeners? You're going to need to get folks to share this with others and say, hey, have you seen this? There's this new guy out there doing these Gundam paintings.
Well, but 3 hours to paint that little thing. Like, how passionate is he about this?
Yeah, he's super passionate about it, right? And there's people watching. He had a half a dozen people watching him, and they were interacting with him, and he was interacting back just like you're supposed to do on Twitch. And it was for him. It was a really, really, really good first run. Now, will you get to number 2? That's the hard part. You get past the adrenaline of that first one, and then you're like, oh God, this is a lot of work, to do these kinds of things. So we'll see if he makes it to 2. I'll encourage him to do it. He's coming over tomorrow night, so I'll spend some time talking to him about it. I'm super proud of him for doing it. But the thing is, Dave, on this, the audience is super, just like the person you were reading earlier. The audience is, if you're engaged in this, you're super engaged. And so he's got an awesome opportunity to really connect with those folks.
Now, is this something where he's going to take the video and put it on YouTube? And
it's a good question. I don't know. I encourage him just to do one.
Yeah.
Like, this was like, he kept talking about it. I'm like, John, just get on and do one. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
And I imagine he's super creative this way. We'll see what he does. I've given him some advice. Let's see what he. I want him to do 5 or 6 of these live streams and just see where it goes.
Yeah.
Like, and then if you can reuse that content, you can. You think I'm a monitor nut? I got it from him. He's got. His studio is stacked. He's super nerdy and he's a really good kid. So I'm super proud of him. But I'm going to encourage him, just do 5 or 6 and see where this thing goes. I'm sure some of that content, Dave, will be moved to YouTube at some point. Will it be a podcast? I don't think so, because this isn't where audio is helpful at all.
No.
Right? Not at all. Not at all. Now, what he could do is he could make an audio version where he talks about it with a co-host, or he talks about it in a condensed version. And then that could be a podcast that's a add-on to his Twitch stream. He could do that.
Yeah, very much so. This is where I see travel podcasts kind of drop the ball on this, where they will talk about, we're in Italy and this gondola, blah, 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 yada. And you should have seen the rich reds of these flowers were amazing. All they have to say is, I have a picture of this on my website.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
people that are sucked into the story are going to do that. So he could do something like this. Well, I decided to use red and blah, blah, blah here, because of such and such. And then to say, if you want to watch me actually do this, check out the replay at such and such.
Yeah. By the way, as I was watching this, painting Gundams, painting anything, way more complicated than I thought. Like he'd put a base layer on underneath, and then he'd put a layer over the top of it, and then he'd scratch it to kind of make it look distressed and stuff. And you get down, these are little tiny, I mean, they're a dollar size, US silver dollar size.
Wow.
Little tiny parts. And I was like, man, that looks super cool. So it was not one of those things. He's my son, so I'm going to watch it every chance I get, but not one of those things everybody's going to want to watch. Right. But those who do want to watch it, if you engage with them, super engaging.
Yeah. Anything big happening for Father's Day? How many kids do you have? 6?
I have 5. I have 5.
Okay.
Don't give me any more than I already have. It's a lot of work, just as it is. Yeah, no, just a cat that Sarah invited the kids over Sunday night just to kind of hang out. I'm like, no, I don't want to make a big deal out of it. Just if you want to come over, you can do it.
Just having your kids around. That's always
that's the best part of it. Like they come over and just hang out. It's super fun.
Nice, excellent. Well, on the School of Podcasting, I'm doing something. It's not really that crazy. But I've seen this question now 5 times in the last 4 days, and I've kind of talked about it before on how you can just be you, but I'm doing a deep dive on how to do a solo show, and I realize that they're not for everybody. But here's the thing I discovered. I had somebody say, wait, you edited? And I'm like, oh, yeah, there's a lot of editing. So I'm going to attempt to do a solo show with no editing, and leave all the edits in just to show you just how bad I can be. So that's the plan on Monday's School of Podcasting. And I'm going to talk about what went into it and really kind of peel back the curtain. Jim, what's coming up on Home Gadget Geeks?
Dave, I took 2 weeks off. Not just one, but 2.
You can do that?
Feels great. I've been podcasting a bunch at work, so I took 2 weeks off. But let me encourage you to use this to listen to an episode of School of Podcasting. If you're a regular listener or whatever, you haven't checked that out, use this week to go over there and listen to School of Podcasting. You're doing some great work there, so I appreciate it.
And probably by Monday, the podcast review show will be back in Spotify.
With all the errors fixed.
I have my work cut out when I get done.
You got a lot of editing to do this week.
I do have a lot of editing to do. But thanks to the chat room, and thanks to Mark at podcastbranding.co, and to Dan at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. And everybody, if your father's around and he's not a schmuck, be sure to, take the time. And if you are a father, be sure to pat your little ones on the head and let them know how much you love them. So thanks, everybody. We will see you again next week with another episode of Ask the Podcast Coach. Like and subscribe and ring the bell.